Ladies and gentlemen, we're finally going to move forward to our first panel discussion. The much awaited panel discussion. We're going to start it now. The fourth industrial revolution is upon us. Although it is more pervasive in the industrialized world, but emerging markets such as ours are not insulated from its devastating effects. Connected with global value chains, automation is the new normal to stay competitive. I would now like to invite the moderator and the panelists to come on the stage to start the session on the future of skills in the fourth era of industrial revolution. We would like to invite Mr. Muhammad Ali Khan, who is the moderator for this panel. Mr. Muhammad Ali Khan is the Senior Education Specialist, International Finance Corporation, and he has specially come from the US to be a part of this conference.
Thank you.
Mr. Dirk Schmautzer, Partner and Co-Head Global Education Practice, McKinsey & Company. Mr. Qasif Shahid, Co-Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Finja. Fahad Iqbal, Managing Director, Ravi Automobile. Mr. Patrick Morton, Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Generation U Employed.
Thank you, Mashal. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. My name is Mohammed. Delighted to be here. I'm looking for any opportunity to come back to Lahore, which is the city of my birth, and thanks to Jawad and the organizers, I have the opportunity today. So we have, as you heard, assembled a galaxy of talent on the stage to help us unravel the topic before us today, which is about the fourth industrial revolution, its onset, and its implications. So let me start by maybe providing a bit of context and start from the global perspective. What we are seeing in the world today is, in terms of youth, a high degree of unemployment. Almost 200 million youth are unemployed, but more important than that, there is this terminology that's come in called NEET. People who are not in education, not in employment, and not in training. And that number exceeds 600 million. And part of the reason for all of this is that even as emerging markets grow and economies develop and move up the chain of skills and value addition, there's still a big disconnect. There's the thing called the skills gap. So people come out of colleges and universities and technical institutions with credentials. On the other hand, there are employers waiting to hire them, but there are no marketplaces where that intersection occurs. And also there's a gap in the skills that these young people receive and the real demands of the employers. And because of this, there are all these millions and millions of youth worldwide who are either unemployed or they are seriously underemployed. So this is causing a lot of challenges. At the same time, as we speak, there is this phenomena called the fourth industrial revolution, and it's unfolding before our eyes, more in the advanced developed world, but gradually making its way to developing countries as well. And how is it unfolding? Automation is increasing, the use of robots is increasing, we have machine learning getting to more and more refined and sophisticated levels. Big data and analytics is driving enterprises towards greater scale, lower costs, and greater efficiency. And all of this, we hear about the phenomena of 3D printing, and now the latest is blockchain technology, which is changing the way transactions are conducted, the way they are stored, the way document trails are constructed. All of this has implications for businesses, for government, and obviously for the people that work there and for the youth of the future who are going to be entering these markets. So at the same time as these phenomena are occurring, there is a lot of doomsday scenarios that, the robots are going to take over the world, everybody will be out of a job. But remember, we've been here before. The first time we were here was in the 17th century, right? When the Industrial Revolution started, we had this group of people called the Luddites, who would go around breaking machinery and smashing it to pieces because they thought it was threatening jobs. We also experienced this in the 30s, when people like John Maynard Keynes were predicting doomsday prophecies about people, the end of full employment and the advent of technology, etc. So it's not a new phenomena. In the 70s, when the technology revolution started, we also had these, like computers would replace people. That didn't happen. What has happened is that there has been an evolution. We've gone from one wave and one stage of industrial activity to the next stage. We've gone from an over-reliance or an over-emphasis of manufacturing to the services sector. We've gone from manufacturing and activity being concentrated in one part of the world to it being more diffused to lower cost locations where labor is more efficient or more cost effective and so on. We've gone to global supply chains where integration makes it possible now to produce automotive components in another part of the world and use them in the final product in another part of the world, and same with other products and services. So it's not all negative, it's not all doomsday. Life has changed, activity has changed, the nature of work has changed, the nature of skills have changed. And to help us unravel this mystique, and also to maybe counter some of the pessimism and the doomsday theories, the panel is here with us, and I would like to get started and invite them. And particularly it's relevant in the case and context of emerging markets, because here we are sitting in a very large emerging market, 200 million young people or people with a demographic dividend, huge youth population, a new government at the helm of affairs, the promise of a better tomorrow. How are we going to fulfill this promise to our youth in terms of jobs, in terms of gainful employment, in terms of a better future, in terms of a secure future for themselves and their families? So let me start. Dirk, let me turn to you first. Tell us, we talked, and one of the earlier speakers also talked about the fact that when our workers go overseas, they are largely unskilled. As you look at the world from your vantage point, what is the impact of these new changes on the relatively low-skilled or the relatively unskilled workers?
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. That's a good question. And as you rightly say, there's a lot of doomsday scenario out there. Right? People are saying, yes, we have been there before, but this time it's different, right? This time the robots are going to take our jobs, and especially if you look at developing economies and with lots of low-skilled workers, that's it, right? Let's all go home. While these stories are there, there's relatively little facts out there. So let me share a couple of facts to put that into perspective. Fact number one. So indeed, there is a significant amount of potential for automation. If you look at all the activity today that is being performed, all the work activity, 50% of that activity can be automated. And I'm not talking about some Star Trek technology. This is technology available today, 50% of activity. So that part is true. However, fact two, the actual expected amount of automation is probably more around 15%, right? Because that full potential over the next 10 years is not going to be realized. So here we already have a bit of a counter. Number three, I spoke about activity. I didn't speak about jobs. That's a big difference, right? If you look at actual jobs that are likely to vanish due to technology, that's maybe 1% of jobs. However, if you look at jobs that will change, you see 60% of jobs that are likely going to have 30% or more of activity going to be automated, meaning the chance that a robot will take your job is almost zero. The chance that you will have to, going forward, work with a robot or technology is very, very high, right? But that's a big difference. Fact number four, this whole technology and automation thing is a big trend, no question, but there's other big trends. Right? I mean, you look at Pakistan, the biggest trend in the past and probably the biggest trend going forward will be a rise of the middle class, rising incomes. Through that trend alone, we're going to create more jobs than automation will ever take. So in sum, and that's number 5, if you put all of this together, we would expect you would probably need to reskill 10%, 5 to 10% of the Pakistani workforce. That's still a large number, but significantly more jobs will be created going forward. So there is a challenge, but there's also lots of opportunity.
So you're saying there's still a window of opportunity for reskilling, for upskilling, and the rise of the emerging middle class is going to drive maybe consumption higher, spending patterns, interest in education, investment in education, and so on.
It's a really big panorama window, right?
A big panorama and a big array of opportunities out there, which maybe we are not focusing on as we get caught up in this whole, turmoil of the fourth revolution. Which is a good segue into my next question, which is related to what Dirk was saying. And Patrick, I'll pull you in on this. So in terms of unskilled workers, what's the impact in terms of socioeconomic terms of getting replaced by automation? Where do they go if the doomsday scenario or part of it comes true? No.
Oh, that button. Okay.
Okay.
There are 2 buttons. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think, as Dirk was saying, a lot of this is then a shift in what the skills are that are needed. And so I think the real risk here is around that transition period, right? Because if you've got folks who are in the lower skill cadre of the workforce and don't have access to that training and opportunity to shift skills, then what you see is them potentially falling out of the workforce or falling down the ladder in some way or another, and then that leads to further inequality, right? And so that inequality, in my view, is kind of the big challenge, the big risk over this transitional period, rather than kind of a disappearance of jobs. So, what are some governments doing in order to address this? They're taking some different approaches. Singapore is an interesting example where they have a full agency who's devoted to the future of skills. What are the skills that are going to be needed by the workforce down the line? And they're looking in 1, 5, 10-year increments. And they're actually taking an experimental approach where they're working with a number of different types of organizations, ours included, to understand, what are the different mechanisms that we can put in place in order to develop these skills, in order to be responsive to industry needs as they shift. Other governments are taking a similar approach.
So, sorry to interrupt, but do you have examples? So Singapore is a great example, but it's an extremely well-governed city-state.
Sure.
So the scale of things that they do is very different from some of the other emerging markets and developing countries that we talk about.
Definitely. So Saudi Arabia is an interesting counterexample. Still, obviously, with kind of more wealth from a government standpoint, but they're taking a less managerial approach and more of a mandate approach. And what they're saying is all of the companies over the next few years are going to have targets set on them that they have to employ a certain number of nationals. And so for them, it's more of this nationalization push, bringing in fewer exported workers. But those mandates are meaning that the private sector is being very directly incentivized with penalties in order to attract and upskill local workers into these jobs, and finding those opportunities where they might have either outsourced or automated, et cetera, before. So they're shifting the market through penalties and then seeing what approaches the private sector comes up with.
And so, Fahad, you run a successful manufacturing business. We talked earlier, you've actually invested in a training facility to train your own pipeline, but also to serve the needs of people in other, in other companies. How is the impact of what we talked about earlier, the fourth industrial revolution, the onset of automation, how is this impacting your sector, and how are you coping with it?
So, Mac, while I think we cannot surely deny that the global landscape is changing and is changing very rapidly, and we see the manufacturing sector absolutely transform in the developed industrial countries, especially where they're doing large-scale manufacturing. However, I feel that Pakistan at large, whatever manufacturing sector we look at, is a little behind on that curve. A large part of it is what Almas Saab earlier was talking about, is because of what we produce. We are not really producing very high value added products. And that is the reason why, in terms of scale, we are still further behind on the curve. And I feel that this impact of, let's say, automation taking over jobs is we're still far behind it. I think today the gap that we feel is how do we actually acquire talent to do what we need to do today. So I think the level of skill that is required in Pakistan is how do we stay competitive in what we are still doing. While I think the manufacturing sector at large needs to concentrate on what industries they need to focus on, and then kind of cater to the skill that they require. But I think whatever manufacturing sector you would talk to in Pakistan, you would always find people still searching for talent. So it's not an issue of us having a skilled force and then fearing that what will happen to these people. I think it's more of a question of how do we train those 200 million population to actually get our demands kind of fulfilled. So I see that I think if the manufacturing sector at large is able to identify key sectors where they see themselves, I think we can kind of take this very positively and start training people as to what is required today from us.
So you're looking at the glass half full, optimistic. That you see there's a bit of a lag in terms of the effects of the fourth revolution unfolding in Pakistan, and there's an opportunity to value add by upskilling your workforce.
Absolutely.
And Qasif, so does the same lag apply in your space? I know you're in the fintech space, but broadly in the IT space, which seems to be driving a lot of this change and this revolution, how are things and how are you coping with it? And give us your view.
Thank you. We think the future is much better than most of us can imagine, first of all. And the thing is that technology and ICT has a way of pushing humanity upwards. So most roles are going to change to become more inclusive, more innovative, and more global. So what's going to happen is, and very quickly, and I think that it's going to happen in the emerging markets faster than the developed markets. And that's because there's not much in the emerging markets. The developed markets are invested in the existing infrastructure, good for us. And if you've got good leadership, we can actually leapfrog all of this. But if you've got substandard leadership, then they'll keep buying from the factories that the developed world has. And lucky for us, there is change in the air.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the confluence of robotics and AI and machine learning, 3D printing, Internet of Things, all of that is going to really change the way the service industry works. And I think that's what you want to ask me. And I don't see in Pakistan and in the Gulf jobs like, waiters and drivers and gatekeepers and ushers and greeters and people, doing haircuts. All of this is going to be replaced. Instead, there are going to be people which will then manage these aggregated experiences.
Right.
And, so if there is a restaurant, you're not going to go and have a waiter serve you, and it's going to happen very quickly. You would do a self-order, or you'll have an android take the order. There'll be a conveyor belt. People in the back, there's going to be a robotic chef. So the restaurant is going to be run by 2 or 3 people, and these people are going to be the curators of these new experiences. That means that they need a completely different level of skill, which means they would need to have creative thinking, they would need to have problem solving, data analytics, emotional intelligence, leadership, and most of all, a value system and character, because it's going to take a very long time before the machines develop that. So a lot of times decisions have to be made which would be in the long term and evidently not good in the short term. And we would need humans to do that. Now, this kind of skill can only be taught at a primary level. So basic foundational skill set and a values training in character is what we need to teach our people to be relevant. And if we do this, we could actually stop being an emerging market very quickly, right? And that's the opportunity.
Yeah. So, I mean, cognitive skills, you mentioned foundational skills, and the very interesting data point now is that our kids or our grandkids, those that are in primary, secondary school today, will be doing jobs that don't exist today. And that in itself is a pointer towards the jobs of the future, what kind of skill sets they will need. And so, Patrick, I look to you again to help us understand, because I know you're active in this space in different emerging markets. How are you starting or implementing initiatives that will help to build youth for the jobs of the future?
Yeah. The single most important thing is to structure it in such a way that you have to be responsive to the private sector's needs. Not that you can choose to be, but that you must be. And you do that through getting the private sector financially involved. Because so many of the skills training programs around the world today train based on what the given kind of curriculum writing organization thinks employers need, thinks they will need, and which so often doesn't actually line up with what's coming down the line. And so forcing employers to actually engage on that meaningfully by getting them financially involved makes all the difference, because they won't pay for something that they don't care about now and won't care about tomorrow. So that's in our mind the single most important thing. The second thing is then to make the training that you provide resilient. And so you do that in a couple of ways, right? And I know we've got another panel later on kind of what are the skills that are specifically needed, so I won't spend too much time on that, but it's two things mainly. It's one is the kind of the soft skills, right? Those behavioral and those mindset skills that are going to translate across professions. And then the other is to try and train in skills that are going to provide adjacent opportunities, right? So train for job roles that have similar roles around them. How do you think about the way in which a retail worker or a waiter could translate into the healthcare sector, could translate into some more experiential roles like you talk about? So that selection of roles and that selection of what you're training for is one big thing, and then obviously getting the employers financially involved such that you're ensuring that you're training for the right stuff.
And Dirk, from your experience in the region, do you want to quickly weigh in on and add to what Patrick said?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So I think many large companies in the region are realizing the need to reskill significantly, and they are realizing that the way to do that is to engage with training providers early, to have an on-the-job, off-the-job training, to go into a boot camp type model. So I think the experience with employers is pretty similar to what we just heard.
And specifically, Fahad, for the manufacturing sector, if we think of the jobs for the future in this country, in this cultural context, in this socio-economic environment, what are the top 3-4 things that you think we should be focusing on?
Mike, I think if we look at that, what is already available in the country, we have the TEFTAs and the PBTCs, and they have a very substantial infrastructure available to them. However, unfortunately, I think the problem has always been, and that's probably how it is in all emerging markets, that the government infrastructure is always very sluggish in terms of, understanding the needs and the demands of the industry, and they're working on their own pace, and there's this gap that is always there, and that's exactly what has happened in Pakistan as well. Where we have these large number of campuses available, students or people still going there to get skilled, but what they are learning is far away from what the industry actually requires today. So I think as Patrick was also mentioning in an example earlier, that this private sector engagement or the industry's engagement in terms of the upgradation of those curriculums or the needs of the industry is very important. I think Timur Sab earlier also mentioned in his speech, it's what the employer actually requires is most of the time much simpler than what you're actually trying to give him.
Right.
So if you just simply go and ask the industry that, okay, what is it that you need today, and just train people for those specific needs, I think, you know, this would solve much faster. So I think just to give you a little example of, you know, what we did, you had earlier mentioned it about the training school that we run. So about a decade ago, I think or about 2003-04, when the first real auto industry boom came in Pakistan, you know, we of course wanted to upgrade ourselves and also, you know, look at that as an opportunity to increase our business. And we realized that the components that we want to make for the auto industry, we don't have I mean, we can go ahead and buy the equipment for them, but we don't have the skill available to run those machines then. And that's how, you know, this very humble initiative started, and we just started training actually people for our own needs with a very small in-house facility. And when we started talking to payers within the industry, and honestly, once we were kind of done with our basic needs, we realized that everybody was facing this challenge. So today what we've done is that we just go to a larger industry. We ask them, you know, okay, give us your requirements. We'll start a curriculum based on your requirements. They give us the assurance of employment to a large extent, depending on, you know, however many people they require. And it's working out perfectly so far. So I think, you know, at large, that's what we need to do in Pakistan.
And in terms, Qasif, of the one thing that we haven't focused on is we talked about upskilling, reskilling. My sense is that one of the things that's going to be important in the future is you're going to have to constantly reinvent yourself and upskill so this whole notion of lifelong learning, how does that fit in with your vision of the future? You're in this very high-tech space. How do you see other sectors also integrating this type of thinking?
Yeah, I'll speak on that briefly, but
sure.
You know, I think I won't get a chance to speak after this. So I think
also we need to be very succinct now, guys.
So I think the future is
I
think the future is not about universities and colleges. The future is about polytech.
Okay.
So, you know, it's about teaching people, like he's saying, how to do, and, you know, all the curriculum in the universities are outdated anyways. So, you know, I think universities are going to be reinvented completely very quickly. Okay. But what I want to tell you guys is that in Pakistan, we are at a cusp of a huge social and economic change, and that's going to happen because 100 million people in this country are going to reinvent their relationship with money. That's what's going to happen.
Right.
And it's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years. And that would have such great, at that point, Pakistan would stop being an emerging market because trillions of rupees are going to come into the economy, and the current government is going to sort of ride this wave. It's going to happen anyways. It's happened in Pakistan twice before. The first time it happened was when in year 1999, Pakistan was 137th country in terms of landlines. By 2010, we had become the 6th largest country in terms of people connected with feature phones. Now by 2020, we would become the 5th largest country in the world in terms of people connected to the internet at the back of smartphones. What I'm talking about is a much smaller disruption because these smartphones would have apps which would be mobile wallets, and everything would become interoperable, and money would become digital, and people will digitally start to consume money and reinvent their relationship. And when that happens, this country is going to change. All the issues that we have, most of them are going to be solved. And it's just that this is going to happen over 4 or 5 years, so it's not as sensational as some of the other stuff, you know, that gets, you know, heads turned around. That's why we are not covering. But really, this is the big opportunity which is upon us. And obviously, the ICT is at the back of it, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So guys, last question. We are on a real time clock now. Anybody can take it, but it has to be very brief. The big elephant in the room, the government. What should the government do? What is your 1 or 2 messages in terms of developing the skill space for the jobs of the future? Give me one recommendation. Anybody can.
Let me try. I do 3 very brief ones. 1, just get the facts. Right? If you do this fact-free, if you don't know what jobs where will go, what will come, that is very difficult. 2, set a target, because I fully agree with you, there's something around helping people that need to be reskilled, but there's something about setting an ambition, creating new industries, pushing economic development. So that's number 2. And 3, change the reskilling machine. I also agree with you, universities will vanish. Go empower the private sector to work with training providers to learn better and faster. Maybe create a new language of skills, because bachelors and masters and diplomas are going to vanish soon.
I think we do very well if we support entrepreneurship, which we need to support startups and fintechs. All incumbents in all industries are platforms, and platforms cannot innovate to save their lives. The government itself is the biggest platform. We need to open these platforms up, and we need to have fintechs and startups come on top and reinvent. I always say that history doesn't always repeat itself, but it usually rhymes. This has happened before. iOS and Android were platforms. They went out. They said 70% of the revenue would come from the app developers. That has changed the world. When history is going to be written down 50 years from now, that's the main inflection point. We got to do the same to all industries, to all incumbents in this country. So I think Pakistan would transform if we have fintechs and startups come on top of these incumbents.
Thank you. Patrick, very quickly.
Incentivize all of your training providers based on the actual employment outcomes, whether that's outcomes getting into the job or success on the job, to cut out all of the unnecessary fat along the way.
Thank you. So we have 1 minute and a bit left. Can we take one question or 2 questions? Is that okay? Anybody in the audience would like to ask a very specific, concisely worded question to any of the panel?
Too much time pressure.
Quick question, sir. Oh. And please identify yourself, your affiliation, and who do you want the answer to come from?
So this is Shahzad Isaac. I work for Bank Al-Falah. My question is, what does it take to specifically reskill, multi-skill, upskill the whole economy?
And who is it directed to?
Perhaps Qasif can take this.
Qasif can take it.
I think the first thing is that we need to, I think we need to finish the world is divided in haves and have-nots. So the first thing is, what is the greatest equalizer today? It is that you have a financial identity and you have a digital identity. I think we need to give everybody a smartphone. We need to make sure they're connected to the internet. They have a financial identity and a digital identity. And through this new means, we upscale them. If you don't have a smartphone which is not connected to the internet, if you don't have a financial identity, you're going nowhere. And that's what we got to do.
Thank you very much to the panel for having made this job so easy. Thank you to the audience for listening so attentively. And we hope we set the tone for all the rest of the panels to come. Thank you and shukriya.
Thank you so much, everyone. We would now like to invite Jawad on the stage to please hand over a small token of appreciation to all our guests. We're now going to break for tea. It's served at the back of the hall. We're going to reassemble after 15 minutes. Please make sure that we're all back and seated so we can start the next session on time. Thank you so much.
And enjoy your tea.